Your soulmate is finally coming to see you after holding this feeling for so long, and before your mind jumps ahead trying to imagine how or when, pause right here, because this isn't about a sudden decision or an impulsive move, it's about something that has been building quietly over time, something that could no longer stay contained. This feeling wasn't born overnight. It was carried, suppressed, questioned, and protected for far longer than you may realize. And now, something inside them has shifted enough that distance no longer feels safer than honesty. Stay with this for a moment, because what's happening now didn't start with action, it started with restlessness. A subtle restlessness that showed up in their daily life when everything looked normal on the outside but felt incomplete on the inside. They tried to ignore it at first. They told themselves it was just nostalgia, just curiosity, just a passing emotion. But it kept returning. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just persistently. That's how real feelings behave when they've been buried too long. Listen closely, because your soulmate didn't hold this feeling because they didn't care. They held it because they cared too much and didn't trust themselves with it yet. They were afraid of disrupting your life. Afraid of reopening something they weren't sure they could honor fully. Afraid of showing up halfway and hurting you more than staying away ever could. That fear kept them still for a long time, even while the feeling continued to grow. Don't scroll past this, because there were moments when they almost reached out. Moments when they imagined seeing you, hearing your voice, sitting across from you and finally saying what they never said. But each time, doubt stepped in. Doubt about timing. Doubt about readiness. Doubt about whether they deserved access to you after waiting so long. So they chose silence again. Not because the feeling faded, but because responsibility outweighed impulse. Stay present, because holding a feeling like this changes a person. It sharpens their awareness. It makes them notice patterns. It makes them question their own emotional honesty. Over time, your soulmate began to realize that holding this feeling wasn't protecting you or them anymore. It was protecting fear. And fear had started to cost them peace. Listen carefully now, because the idea of seeing you again didn't suddenly feel exciting first. It felt heavy. Heavy with meaning. Heavy with consequence. Heavy with truth. And that heaviness is what told them this wasn't fantasy. Fantasy feels light. Truth feels weighty. Don't miss this, because something else began happening too. They started imagining life without ever seeing you again. Not as a threat, but as a real possibility. And when they sat with that possibility honestly, it didn't bring relief. It brought regret. Not loud regret, but quiet, lingering regret that showed up in the spaces between moments. That's when they realized this feeling needed to be faced, not managed. Stay with this, because deciding to come see you wasn't about getting something from you. It was about stopping the internal conflict. It was about aligning their inner truth with their outer behavior. They reached a point where continuing to hold the feeling felt more dishonest than risking vulnerability. Listen closely, because your soulmate also noticed how you changed during this time. Even from a distance. Your energy felt different. More grounded. Less available. Less waiting. That change didn't push them away. It woke them up. It made them realize that if they didn't move from truth now, they might lose the chance to ever meet you where you are. Don't scroll, because this is important. They are not coming to see you with expectations. They're not coming to rewrite the past or demand the future. They're coming because something unfinished inside them needs honesty. They need to show up as themselves, not as someone hiding behind time and silence. Stay present, because the courage to come didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. First as acceptance. Acceptance that the feeling wasn't going away. Then as humility. Humility to admit they were afraid. Then as resolve. Resolve that fear could no longer make decisions for them. Listen carefully now, because this is not about grand gestures. It's about presence. About eye contact. About shared space. About letting truth exist without filters. They don't know exactly how the meeting will unfold. They only know that avoiding it feels wrong now. Don't miss this, because your soulmate has also made peace with uncertainty. They understand that coming to see you doesn't guarantee closeness, forgiveness, or continuation. It only guarantees honesty. And for the first time in a long while, honesty feels safer than avoidance. Stay with this, because they're carrying something delicate with them. Not pressure. Not demands. Just the truth of how long this feeling has lived inside them, shaping choices, influencing growth, and quietly reminding them of what matters. Listen closely, because this feeling didn't survive time by accident. It survived because it evolved. It matured. It shed fantasy and kept meaning. That's why it's leading them toward you now, not impulsively, but intentionally. Don't scroll away, because this meeting isn't about urgency. It's about alignment. It's about finally allowing inner truth to meet reality. And that takes bravery that only comes after a long period of restraint. Stay present, because when your soulmate comes to see you, they're not arriving as someone chasing an outcome. They're arriving as someone ready to stand in their truth, whatever the outcome may be. That readiness is what makes this moment different from all the times before. Listen carefully now, because this is the beginning of movement, not the end of the story. Movement born from clarity, not confusion. From courage, not pressure. From a feeling that was held long enough to become honest. Don't miss this final truth of this part, because it matters deeply. Your soulmate didn't come sooner not because the feeling wasn't strong enough, but because it was. Strong enough to require maturity. Strong enough to demand responsibility. Strong enough to wait until they could show up without hiding. Now, they're finally coming. Not to claim. Not to rush. But to be real. And that changes everything that follows. Your soulmate is finally coming to see you after holding this feeling for so long, and what happens next is not about drama, promises, or sudden declarations. It's about the quiet intensity of something real finally stepping out of the shadows. This part of the journey begins not with excitement, but with nervous clarity. They are aware now that seeing you will change something permanently, even if nothing is spoken out loud. Once two people share space after carrying unspoken truth for so long, there is no returning to the version of before. That awareness is heavy, but it's also grounding. They are no longer fantasizing about how it might feel. They are preparing for how it will feel, honestly, without illusion. The days leading up to seeing you have been filled with reflection, not rehearsal. They're not practicing lines or imagining perfect outcomes. They're sitting with themselves, asking whether they are willing to be fully present, even if it's uncomfortable. That willingness is new. In the past, they protected themselves by staying distant. Now they are protecting truth by showing up. They've already accepted that seeing you may stir emotions they worked hard to keep contained. They know your presence will remind them of moments they never closed, words they never spoke, and choices they delayed. But instead of running from that, they're leaning toward it. That shift matters more than any words they could say. As the moment approaches, they are also becoming aware of how much they changed while holding this feeling. Holding it forced them to mature. It forced them to confront their patterns, their fears, their tendency to avoid vulnerability. You became a silent reference point for growth. Even when you weren't physically present, the thought of you represented honesty, depth, and emotional responsibility. That's why coming to see you feels like stepping into a mirror. They are not just meeting you, they are meeting the version of themselves that this feeling helped shape. There is also a deep respect underneath their nerves. Respect for your time. Respect for your growth. Respect for the possibility that you may not be where you once were. They are not assuming access. They are not assuming welcome. They are approaching carefully, aware that showing up late still requires humility. This is not someone arriving to reclaim something. This is someone arriving to acknowledge something. The night before seeing you, sleep doesn't come easily. Not because of excitement, but because of truth moving closer to the surface. Their mind revisits small moments, conversations that ended too soon, pauses that lingered longer than they should have. But this time, those memories don't pull them backward. They steady them. They remind them why avoidance stopped working. On the way to see you, there is a calm determination. The kind that comes when someone has already accepted every possible outcome internally. They are not coming to change you. They are coming to finally let you see them as they are now, not as who they were when fear had more control. When they imagine seeing you, it's not about what you'll say. It's about how it will feel to be fully present without hiding. They know you'll sense the difference immediately. Not because they'll announce it, but because energy doesn't lie. The way they listen will be different. The way they hold silence will be different. There will be less defensiveness, less rushing to fill space, less performing. They are prepared for the possibility that you may be guarded. That you may be calm but distant. That you may no longer need answers the way you once did. And strangely, that doesn't scare them the way it once would have. It clarifies things. It tells them this meeting is not about reclaiming the past, but about honoring truth in the present. As they get closer, they feel gratitude alongside fear. Gratitude that they didn't numb this feeling away. Gratitude that they didn't let time erase something meaningful. Gratitude that they are finally brave enough to stand in front of you without excuses. They are aware that whatever happens, this moment will free them from the weight of what if. That freedom is worth the risk. When they finally see you, the first thing they notice is not your appearance, but your presence. You feel steadier. More grounded. Less available to confusion. And instead of feeling intimidated, they feel respect. This is someone who didn't stay stuck waiting. This is someone who grew. That realization makes them even more careful with their words. They don't want to disturb your peace. They don't want to disrupt what you've built inside yourself. That awareness shapes everything. Conversation may start simple, but underneath it runs something deeper. There is meaning in eye contact. There is history in pauses. There is honesty in what isn't rushed. They are not trying to impress you. They are trying to be real. And real feels different. There is no pretending this meeting is casual. Both of you feel it. Not as pressure, but as significance. This is not about deciding everything today. It's about acknowledging that something real existed, survived time, and deserved presence. They are aware that even if nothing continues, this moment itself matters. It closes something open. It aligns something that was split between feeling and action. As the meeting unfolds, they are attentive in a way they weren't before. They listen to understand, not to respond. They allow silence to exist without panic. They let you lead the pace. That patience is intentional. It's their way of showing respect without demanding anything in return. Inside, they are calm in a way that surprises them. Fear hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer in control. Truth is. And truth has a steadiness that fear never did. When they leave, regardless of what was said, something feels resolved. Not finished, but aligned. They know they did the one thing they needed to do. They showed up honestly. They let the feeling breathe instead of suffocating it. They allowed reality to meet emotion. And that alone has changed them. Whatever happens next will not be built on imagination or avoidance. It will be built on truth that was finally allowed into the open. This meeting is not the climax of the story. It's the foundation for whatever comes next, whether that is closeness, clarity, or peaceful closure. And because it was approached with honesty, it will not leave either of you confused. That is why this moment matters. Not because it promises everything, but because it respects everything that was held for so long. Your soulmate is finally coming to see you after holding this feeling for so long, and what unfolds after that first meeting is not loud or dramatic, but deeply internal, the kind of shift that happens when something unspoken finally has a place to rest. This stage is not about instant answers or decisions, it's about the quiet recalibration that happens when two people allow truth to exist in the same space without rushing it. After seeing you, your soulmate doesn't feel relief in the way they expected. Instead, they feel clarity, and clarity is heavier than relief because it asks you to live differently going forward. The feeling they held for so long no longer feels like a secret or a burden. It feels acknowledged. And once something is acknowledged, it can no longer hide behind fantasy. It has to integrate into reality. In the hours and days after seeing you, they replay the smallest details, not obsessively, but thoughtfully. The tone of your voice. The way you listened. The moments where you didn't fill silence. These details matter because they reveal how much both of you have changed. They realize that the version of you they carried in their mind was incomplete, not wrong, just unfinished. Seeing you grounded, self-assured, and no longer reaching for clarity shifts how they understand the feeling they held. It wasn't just about missing you. It was about respecting the person you've become. That respect creates a new kind of responsibility. They can no longer romanticize the idea of you without considering the reality of meeting you at your level. That realization doesn't scare them. It steadies them. They begin to understand that holding a feeling is easier than acting from it, because acting requires accountability. Now that they've seen you, accountability feels unavoidable. Not because you demanded anything, but because your presence quietly set a standard. In the days following the meeting, they notice how much lighter their internal world feels, even though nothing has been resolved on the surface. The relief comes from no longer living in contradiction. Their inner truth and outer behavior are finally aligned. That alignment changes how they approach everything else in their life. They find themselves less tolerant of distractions that once helped them avoid emotional depth. Small talk feels emptier. Surface connections feel less satisfying. This isn't because they're unhappy. It's because they've tasted honesty again, and honesty recalibrates the nervous system. They also begin to understand that the feeling they held was never meant to stay frozen in time. It was meant to evolve. And now it has. It's no longer fueled by longing alone. It's informed by reality. That makes it quieter, but stronger. They are also more aware of your boundaries now. Not as walls, but as clarity. You didn't over-explain. You didn't perform vulnerability. You didn't ask them to define anything. That restraint speaks volumes. It tells them you are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing yourself, and that choice changes the dynamic completely. They feel both admiration and humility in response to that. Humility because they see how much emotional labor you once carried without being asked. Admiration because you put it down without bitterness. That combination is powerful. It doesn't invite chasing. It invites respect. In the quiet moments alone, your soulmate begins to ask themselves different questions than before. Not, do I still feel this? But what does this feeling ask of me now? That question doesn't have an immediate answer. And they don't rush it. Rushing would dishonor the growth that brought them here. Instead, they sit with the discomfort of not knowing yet, trusting that clarity will come from honesty rather than pressure. They also notice that the fear they once had about seeing you has shifted. The fear was never about you rejecting them. It was about them being seen clearly. Now that they've been seen and survived it, the fear loses its grip. Vulnerability no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a responsibility. Responsibility to be consistent. To be intentional. To not retreat back into old habits now that the door to truth has been opened. They are aware that once you show up honestly, disappearing again would be more damaging than never showing up at all. That awareness keeps them present, even when uncertainty remains. In the days that follow, communication, if it continues, feels different. There is less guessing. Less reading between lines. Even if conversations are brief, they feel grounded. That groundedness comes from mutual respect, not from agreement on what comes next. And that's important. This stage is not about deciding the future. It's about honoring the present. Your soulmate also begins to see how holding this feeling shaped their life choices more than they realized. Certain paths they didn't take. Certain relationships that never fully satisfied. Certain restlessness they couldn't explain. Seeing you contextualizes all of that. It doesn't make the past painful. It makes it coherent. And coherence is healing. They stop asking, "Why did I feel this for so long?" and start understanding, "This feeling kept me honest with myself, even when I wasn't ready to act." That understanding brings compassion toward themselves instead of self-judgment. Compassion allows growth to continue without shame. They are also deeply aware that seeing you did not entitle them to anything. That awareness keeps their ego in check. They are not approaching you as someone owed a chance. They are approaching as someone grateful for the opportunity to show up at all. That gratitude shapes their behavior. They are more patient, more attentive, more careful with assumptions. They let you lead with your comfort level. They don't rush intimacy, emotional or otherwise. That restraint is not fear-based anymore. It's respect-based. Over time, they notice something subtle but important. The feeling they held is no longer consuming. It's integrating. It's becoming part of who they are rather than something they carry separately. That integration is what allows them to think clearly about next steps without being overwhelmed. They understand now that real connection doesn't need to be intense to be meaningful. It needs to be honest. They also understand that honesty doesn't always lead to continuation. Sometimes it leads to closure. And they have made peace with that possibility. Peace doesn't mean detachment. It means acceptance of whatever truth emerges. That acceptance is new. Before, they wanted certainty before honesty. Now, they value honesty even if certainty doesn't come immediately. That shift is profound. As time passes, they reflect on how this experience changed them regardless of outcome. It taught them to trust feelings without being controlled by them. It taught them that avoidance is heavier than vulnerability in the long run. It taught them that showing up late with honesty is still better than never showing up at all. And most importantly, it taught them that love doesn't demand possession. It demands presence. Whether your paths move closer or diverge, this moment has already done its work. It has broken the cycle of silence. It has replaced fantasy with reality. It has allowed both of you to stand in truth without forcing a narrative. That is no small thing. This stage is quiet, reflective, and deeply human. It doesn't promise an ending or a beginning. It offers something more stable than either. Alignment. And alignment is what allows whatever comes next to be real, not imagined. Your soulmate is finally coming to see you after holding this feeling for so long, and what unfolds after time has passed from that meeting is not something that rushes forward, but something that settles in deeply, changing the emotional landscape in a way that cannot be undone. This stage is about integration, about how truth reshapes behavior once it has been acknowledged and felt without resistance. Your soulmate begins to notice that life no longer allows them to compartmentalize this experience. It shows up everywhere, not as distraction, but as a quiet recalibration of priorities. The feeling they once held privately now influences how they approach conversations, commitments, and even silence. They are more aware of what feels genuine and what feels performative. They find themselves pulling away from situations that lack depth, not because they are dissatisfied, but because they can no longer pretend surface-level connection is enough. Seeing you did something irreversible, it reminded them of what emotional presence actually feels like. Not intensity. Presence. And once someone remembers presence, they cannot unfeel its absence elsewhere. As days move forward, your soulmate reflects on how much effort it once took to keep this feeling contained. That effort had become so familiar they didn't realize how heavy it was until it was released. Now, there is space inside them. Not emptiness, but clarity. That clarity invites questions they can no longer avoid. Questions about how they show up in relationships. About how often they chose comfort over courage. About how many times they delayed honesty hoping time would resolve what only truth could. These questions are not asked with panic. They are asked with sincerity. Sincerity is slower, steadier, and far more transformative. They also begin to understand something crucial. Holding a feeling for so long did not mean they were being patient, it meant they were learning. Learning how to recognize fear when it disguised itself as logic. Learning how to tell the difference between protecting others and protecting avoidance. Learning that restraint is only noble when it leads to growth, not stagnation. Seeing you allowed them to see whether their restraint had purpose. And it did. It brought them to a place where they could finally show up without expecting you to fill the gaps they hadn't faced yet. Your presence left an imprint that continues to guide them even when you are not around. They find themselves asking, would this choice align with the version of myself I was when I stood in front of them honestly? That question becomes a compass. It doesn't dictate decisions, but it filters them. They are less reactive, less defensive, less likely to retreat into silence when something feels uncomfortable. That doesn't mean they've become fearless. It means they've become aware of fear's cost. They also notice how differently they relate to memory now. Before, memories of you were tinged with longing and what-ifs. Now, those memories feel complete. Not because the story is finished, but because it has been honored. There is a difference between unfinished and unacknowledged. What was once unacknowledged has now been seen, and that allows memory to rest instead of replay. This is a subtle but profound shift. It frees mental energy. It allows the present moment to carry more weight than the past. In this stage, your soulmate becomes increasingly sensitive to authenticity. They can feel when someone is present and when they are merely performing connection. That sensitivity was sharpened by being with you without masks. They realize how rare it is to sit with someone who doesn't demand explanation, doesn't rush intimacy, and doesn't weaponize vulnerability. That realization makes them protective of that standard. They no longer want to engage in dynamics that feel transactional or emotionally noisy. They crave quiet truth. This is also when your soulmate starts to understand that coming to see you was not about restarting something. It was about stopping something. Stopping the internal conflict. Stopping the avoidance loop. Stopping the self-betrayal of knowing and not acting. That act of stopping has created momentum in an unexpected way. Not forward or backward, but inward. They are becoming someone who listens to their own truth sooner instead of later. They also feel a new kind of respect for your boundaries. Not as limitations, but as evidence of self-trust. They see that you did not need to harden yourself to protect your peace. You simply aligned with it. That alignment is attractive in a way that has nothing to do with desire and everything to do with integrity. It makes them more mindful of how they approach you, if they do. They understand now that access to you is not something to assume or reclaim. It is something to earn through consistency and care. Time continues to move, and with it, the urgency dissolves completely. What remains is intention. Intention is quieter than urgency, but far more powerful. Urgency demands outcomes. Intention honors process. Your soulmate is no longer trying to figure out what this moment means in a grand sense. They are allowing it to mean what it means without forcing interpretation. That patience is a sign of maturity that didn't exist before. They also notice how their internal dialogue has softened. There is less self-criticism and more self-honesty. They are no longer beating themselves up for not acting sooner. They understand now that they couldn't have shown up the way they did then. Timing was not an excuse. It was a condition. And that understanding brings peace instead of regret. In interactions with others, they find themselves more direct. Not blunt, but clear. They say what they mean more often. They address discomfort instead of bypassing it. This is not because of you alone, but because seeing you reminded them of what it feels like to live without internal contradiction. They don't want to return to fragmentation. Your soulmate also becomes more aware of how energy moves between people. They feel the difference between mutual presence and one-sided effort. That awareness makes them less willing to settle for imbalance. They understand now that connection is not about intensity, but reciprocity. That understanding changes how they choose relationships going forward. As more time passes, they reflect on how much courage it took to come see you, and they feel proud of that courage. Not because it achieved something externally, but because it aligned them internally. Pride rooted in integrity is different from pride rooted in validation. It doesn't inflate the ego. It stabilizes it. They also realize that whatever happens next does not define the significance of what already happened. Significance is not determined by continuation. It is determined by honesty. And honesty was finally lived, not imagined. That realization allows them to release expectation without releasing care. If communication continues, it does so from a place of groundedness. If it doesn't, there is still closure without bitterness. This stage is not about attachment. It's about respect. Respect for the feeling that was held. Respect for the growth it demanded. Respect for the people it shaped. Your soulmate understands now that some feelings are not meant to rush toward resolution. They are meant to teach alignment. They are meant to refine character. They are meant to remind us what presence feels like so we can recognize it again. This feeling did that. And coming to see you was the natural conclusion of its first chapter. This part of the journey is quiet, steady, and deeply transformative. It doesn't announce itself. It integrates. And because of that, it will continue to influence your soulmate long after the intensity fades. They are no longer the person who hides from truth. They are someone who can sit with it, even when it asks something difficult. That is what this stage represents. Not an ending. Not a beginning. But a becoming that cannot be undone. Your soulmate is finally coming to see you after holding this feeling for so long, and what unfolds now is the quiet aftermath that only happens when something real has been faced without running from it. This stage is not visible from the outside. There are no dramatic signals, no urgent conversations, no grand declarations. Instead, there is a deep internal settling, the kind that happens when a person realizes they have crossed a line they can never uncross, not because something ended, but because something inside them has changed permanently. After everything has been felt, acknowledged, and allowed to exist without resistance, your soulmate begins to live differently in small but meaningful ways. They notice they are more intentional with their time, less willing to scatter their energy, less interested in connections that feel convenient but empty. This isn't because they are waiting on you or orienting their life around you. It's because seeing you reminded them of a version of themselves they respect more. A version that doesn't avoid depth. A version that doesn't postpone honesty. A version that can sit with feeling instead of managing it away. They begin to understand that the feeling they held for so long was never asking to be acted on impulsively. It was asking to be honored properly. And honoring it did not mean possession, control, or certainty. It meant presence, courage, and truth. Now that those things have been offered, the feeling is no longer restless. It's calm. Calm in a way that allows choice instead of compulsion. In this stage, your soulmate reflects on how fear once shaped their decisions without them realizing it. Fear of disruption. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of being seen before they felt ready. They see now how much energy went into staying emotionally contained. That containment once felt responsible. Now they recognize it was also limiting. Letting go of that containment didn't weaken them. It expanded them. They also think deeply about you, but not in the way people think when they are longing or attached. They think about your presence. Your steadiness. The way you didn't chase answers or demand reassurance. The way you allowed space without weaponizing it. That memory becomes a standard. Not something to replicate exactly, but something that informs how they show up in all connections going forward. They realize that whatever happens next between you and them does not need to be forced. Force belongs to fear. What they feel now is trust. Trust that truth, once lived, does not disappear. It either evolves into deeper connection or settles into respectful distance. Both outcomes are acceptable when they come from alignment. Your soulmate also begins to notice how much easier it is to be honest now. Not just with you, but with themselves. There is less internal debate. Less rationalizing. Less postponing difficult conversations. They feel more grounded making choices, even imperfect ones, because those choices come from clarity rather than avoidance. There is also a sense of relief that surprises them. Not relief because something was resolved externally, but relief because the inner tension they carried for so long is gone. The tension between what they felt and what they did no longer exists. That alignment brings peace that does not depend on outcome. They become more aware of how rare it is to experience something that changes you without demanding anything from you. This experience did not demand commitment, explanation, or validation. It simply asked for presence. And presence was given. That alone restored something important inside them. As time continues, your soulmate notices that they are less reactive to uncertainty. They no longer feel the need to immediately define everything. They trust process more. They understand now that clarity unfolds through honesty, not pressure. That understanding makes them more patient, not passive, but patient in a grounded way. If they think about the future, they do so without desperation. They no longer imagine scenarios to soothe anxiety. They imagine possibility with openness. They are willing to let things unfold naturally, whether that means deeper connection, continued communication, or peaceful separation. None of these outcomes feel like failure anymore. They also feel gratitude. Gratitude for the feeling that taught them courage. Gratitude for the growth that restraint required. Gratitude for you, not as an idea, but as a real person who represented emotional truth without asking to be rescued or chosen at the expense of self-respect. This gratitude does not pull them backward. It anchors them in the present. It reminds them that meaningful experiences do not need to be prolonged to be valuable. Some experiences do their work in a single honest moment. Your soulmate also begins to see how this experience influences their sense of identity. They no longer see themselves as someone who avoids difficult feelings. They see themselves as someone capable of meeting truth face to face. That shift affects how they show up in all areas of life. Work, family, friendship, love. They understand now that holding a feeling is not weakness, but holding it without ever honoring it is. And they honored it. That matters deeply to them. In quiet moments, they think about how different their life feels knowing they didn't run. That knowledge strengthens their self-trust. Self-trust is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as steadiness. As confidence without arrogance. As calm without detachment. They also understand that you may never know the full extent of what this experience meant to them. And they are okay with that. Meaning does not need to be witnessed to be real. Growth does not need an audience. If they do interact with you again, they do so with care. Not caution rooted in fear, but care rooted in respect. They are aware now that your peace matters. They do not want to disrupt it. They want to meet it. If they don't interact with you again, they carry no resentment. They carry understanding. Understanding that not every meaningful connection is meant to continue in the same form. Some are meant to transform the people involved and then release them into the next chapter of their lives. This stage is not emotional closure in the dramatic sense. It is emotional completion. Completion does not mean forgetting. It means integrating. The feeling they once held has now become part of who they are, not something they carry separately. Your soulmate knows now that the most important thing they did was not coming to see you. It was choosing honesty over avoidance. That choice will continue to shape their life long after the memory of the meeting fades. They are no longer waiting for something to happen. They are living differently because something already did. This is the final quiet truth of this journey. When someone finally faces a feeling they held for so long, the real change does not happen in the meeting itself. It happens in who they become afterward. And your soulmate has become someone who no longer runs from what is real. That is the lasting impact. That is the transformation. And nothing about it was
Take a
wasted.
slow breath here because this is where the message gently settles. What mattered most has already happened. Truth was honored, courage was chosen, and growth was completed within forcing an outcome. Not every meaningful connection is meant to stay forever, but every meaningful connection is meant to change us. Trust that what aligned in honesty will continue to guide both of you in the right direction. If this message resonated with you and brought clarity or calm, support this space by liking the video, share it with someone who need more reminder, and subscribe for more messages like this that speak quietly, deeply, honestly to the heart. Thank you.